Have you ever sat there wondering how your child, this very person you brought into the world, loved, raised, sacrificed for, could turn around and treat you with such disrespect, even rage? Maybe you've tiptoed around their moods, afraid to say the wrong thing. Maybe you've been on the receiving end of yelling, slammed doors, hurtful words. And you thought, where did I go wrong? If you're over 60 and struggling with the emotional roller coaster of dealing with an adult child who seems to overreact to the smallest things, you're not alone. More and more parents are reaching out in confusion and heartbreak, trying to make sense of their son or daughter's behavior, especially when that behavior turns aggressive, unpredictable, or downright cruel. The truth is, some of our adult children have developed unhealthy emotional and relational patterns. That doesn't mean they're evil, and it doesn't mean you failed as a parent. But it does mean they are carrying deep wounds they haven't faced, and they're releasing that pain onto the safest person in their life: you. So, in this video, we're going to talk honestly and gently about what might be going on behind that angry exterior. We're going to explore 5 reasons why your adult child reacts so intensely and why they seem unable to regulate their emotions. And just as important, we'll talk about what this means for you. Because understanding is the first step toward healing and reclaiming your peace. Let's begin with something that's often hidden in plain sight. Your child has too much to hide. I know that sounds backwards. You might be thinking, my child is the one who calls me out, who criticizes me, who acts like they know it all. But underneath all that arrogance, many adult children who behave this way are deeply afraid of being exposed. Not in the way you might think, not for a crime or a secret life, but for what's really happening inside them. They've built a life around control, around always being right, being admired, being in charge. And if you bring up your needs, if you ask them to listen, to take responsibility, or even to admit they've hurt you, that shakes their entire foundation. They don't want an equal relationship. They want a one-way street. You give, they take. And the moment you ask for something in return, a little understanding, some basic respect, they feel like you're attacking them. So they lash out. Because they're hiding the truth. They're scared. Scared that if they stop controlling everything, if they actually look in the mirror and see how they're treating the people who love them, they'll crumble. It's hard to believe, I know. Especially when they act so tough. But so much of that aggression is really a mask. And if you try to get behind it, even gently, they panic. So what do? They punish you for even trying. They use fear. They raise their voice. They twist your words. They guilt trip you. It's not about you. It's about silencing the truth before it gets too close. Now let's talk about something just as important: the fact that many adult children never learned how to regulate their emotions. Think back to when they were little. Maybe they had big tantrums. Maybe they couldn't calm down after a disappointment. Or maybe on the outside they seemed fine, but they never really talked about their feelings. For some children, especially those who experienced emotional neglect, trauma, or felt they couldn't be accepted as their true selves, they learned early on to push those feelings down, to pretend they were okay, even when they weren't. But here's the problem: those buried emotions don't disappear. They grow, they fester, and eventually, they explode. Now that they're adults, even a small trigger, a comment, a tone of voice, a look, can bring up all that suppressed pain. But instead of processing it like a mature adult, they react like a frightened, angry child. They don't see patterns. They don't realize that it's their own unresolved wounds bubbling up. Instead, they blame you. You become the target. And it doesn't matter how careful you are, how gentle, how soft your voice is. When they're in that state, they're not listening, they're defending. And their defense is attack. This is especially painful for you as a parent, because you remember the sweet moments, the bedtime stories, the scraped knees you kissed, the way you showed up for them again and again. And now, to be screamed at or dismissed like you're the enemy. It cuts deep. But hear me on this: their inability to control their emotions is not your fault. You didn't create their inner chaos. You might have made mistakes, what parent hasn't, but the choice to heal or harm lies with them now. And I want to say something else that might be hard to hear but could set you free. You can't fix what they won't face. You can love them. You can set boundaries. But you are not responsible for carrying the weight of their unhealed trauma. Now there's something else underneath all this that you may have noticed. Your child always seems like they're performing, like they constantly need to be the best, the smartest, the most admired person in the room. That's because they feel this overwhelming need to prove their worth every single day. You might have tried to reassure them growing up, told them they were enough, praised them when they did well. But somehow it was never enough. And that's not on you. It's because deep down, they don't believe they're worthy unless they're being admired. So when you, their parent, don't feed into that narrative, when you challenge them, set a boundary, or simply don't act impressed, they feel rejected. And rejection, to someone who operates from this emotional place, isn't just uncomfortable, it's unbearable. It stirs up a kind of shame they will do almost anything to avoid. They see your healthy detachment, your attempts at calm, your silence, not as peace, but as a threat. To them, it's a sign you don't love them, don't respect them, or worse, that you see through them. And when that happens, their response is often rage. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because you didn't play along. If you've ever noticed your child explode after a calm conversation, or become mean after you didn't respond the way they wanted, you're not imagining it. Their sense of self is fragile, and they're depending on you to hold it up, even if it means letting go of your own dignity. But you don't have to do that anymore. You can love them without enabling them. You can care without sacrificing your sanity. And you can choose peace, even if they continue to live in chaos. Now let's go a little deeper. Because there's another layer to this that most parents don't realize, especially when it comes to adult children who show these patterns. And that's the intense pressure they feel to be perfect. Not from you, not from the world necessarily, but from inside themselves. You see, a child who grows up feeling inadequate, unseen, or like they had to earn love through performance often builds their entire identity around being flawless. On the outside, they may act like nothing bothers them, like they've got it all figured out. But on the inside, they are haunted by shame. That shame is like a shadow they can't shake. It follows them everywhere, whispering, "You're not enough." And instead of facing that voice, they spend their lives trying to outrun it. They do this by chasing perfection. Perfect job, perfect partner, perfect image on social media. They want to look like they're thriving, like they've won, like they don't need anybody, and that includes you. But here's the thing, life isn't perfect. People aren't perfect. And trying to control everything so nothing ever goes wrong is exhausting. It's impossible. So when something does go wrong, maybe they make a mistake, maybe someone criticizes them, or maybe you simply don't agree with them, they snap. Why? Because it reminds them that the perfection they've been clinging to isn't real. And instead of letting themselves be human, they blame you. They turn the pressure they feel inside outward. They accuse you of being negative, unsupportive, or even toxic, just for having a boundary or expressing a concern. They can't accept that they're not perfect, so they punish the people who see their imperfections. As a parent, this can be devastating, because you may have spent your entire life lifting them up, encouraging them, helping them through every challenge, and yet somehow they act like you're the one holding them back. But the truth is, they're stuck in a cycle of needing to appear invincible. They don't allow themselves space to be vulnerable or to admit when they're struggling. That's why even a small disagreement can spiral into a huge emotional storm. And because you're the closest person to them, you get hit with the full force of their inner battle. You might find yourself wondering why you can't just have a normal conversation. Why even casual topics, finances, parenting, politics, turn into arguments. Why they're so defensive all the time. It's because every interaction feels like a test to them. a test they're afraid of failing, a test they can't let themselves lose. So they double down. They argue harder. They twist your words. They raise their voice. Not because they don't love you, but because they don't know how to love and feel safe at the same time. Their need to be right is stronger than their ability to be close. And underneath all that noise is a terrified person trying to protect the little dignity they have left. Now let's talk about the last piece of this, and maybe the hardest one to deal with as a parent, their complete inability to tolerate criticism. I want to be clear here. I'm not talking about harsh words or judgment. I'm talking about even the gentlest feedback. A question, a suggestion, a simple observation. Something as small as, "Hey, I felt hurt by the way you spoke to me," can send them into a full-blown meltdown. Why? Because criticism, real or imagined, hits at the very core of their deepest fear, that they are flawed, unworthy, unlovable. Most people can take a little criticism and reflect on it. Maybe they don't like it, but they can sit with it, learn from it, and move on. But your adult child who reacts this way isn't wired the same. For them, criticism doesn't feel like feedback. It feels like their entire sense of self is under attack. It reactivates all the pain they've pushed down for years. It pulls up memories of not being enough, not being seen, not being accepted. And when that flood of emotion comes, they don't know how to cope, so they explode. They might yell, accuse, guilt trip, or shut you out completely. They might bring up old grievances, things that happened 10, 20, even 30 years ago. They might suddenly act as if you are the manipulator, the one at fault, the problem. And it hurts. Deeply. Because you know that's not who you are. But in that moment, their goal isn't truth, it's survival. They're trying to survive the feeling of shame by putting it back onto you. It's like a hot potato they can't hold, so they toss it as fast as they can. And guess who's always there to catch it? You. But you don't have to carry their shame. You don't have to accept the blame for their inability to grow, reflect, or take responsibility. That's not your job anymore. Your job is to protect your peace, to remember your truth, to set boundaries that allow you to breathe again. If your child lashes out every time you try to connect, it's not because you're doing it wrong. It's because they're not ready to be real. Not yet. And you can't wait forever for someone to change while they're tearing you apart in the process. You are allowed to step back. You are allowed to stop explaining yourself. You are allowed to stop walking on eggshells in your own home. Because you matter. Your well-being matters. Your story matters, not just theirs. You've spent your whole life giving, your time, your energy, your heart. And now, it's time to start giving back to you. It takes a lot of courage to admit that someone you love, especially your own child, can also be the one who hurts you the most. And when that pain keeps repeating itself, when the outbursts and the blame become a pattern, it's easy to fall into silence. To shrink. To think, maybe I just need to be more patient. Maybe it's me. But the truth is, love isn't supposed to hurt like that. Not day in, day out. Not when you've tried your best. Not when you've given your heart. And if your adult child lashes out often, leaves you feeling drained, anxious, or even afraid, it's not just a personality quirk. It's emotional abuse. And recognizing that doesn't make you a bad parent, it makes you a brave one. Because you're here. You're listening. You're learning. And you're taking the first steps toward healing. Let's take a moment to gently revisit what we've talked about so far. Behind the anger and aggression of your adult child is a person who is desperately hiding something, whether it's a fear of inadequacy, emotional immaturity, or a deep sense of shame they are not ready to face. They react not because you've done something awful, but because your presence alone threatens the image they've created of themselves. And no matter how softly you speak or how lovingly you correct them, it still feels like criticism to them. So they attack. None of this makes what they do okay. But understanding it gives you the power to stop personalizing their pain. So, where do you go from here? You start by releasing the guilt. parenting doesn't come with a guarantee or a crystal ball. You did the best you could with what you had. And if your child is now grown, they have the same opportunity you had to grow, to reflect, and to take responsibility. Whether they choose to or not, that's not something you can control. What you can control is your own peace, your own boundaries, your own next chapter. That might mean stepping back from constant phone calls that leave you in tears. It might mean saying no more often or not engaging when a conversation turns toxic. It might mean limiting visits or creating distance, not out of punishment, but out of love. Love for yourself. Because here's something nobody talks about enough. Your healing matters too. You are not just a parent. You are a whole human being with feelings, dreams, needs, and limits. And after all you've given, you deserve to feel safe in your own skin and in your own home. You're not being selfish by protecting your mental health. You're not being dramatic. You're honoring the life you still have to live. Maybe you've spent years walking on eggshells, years trying to keep the peace, years hoping they'd finally change. Maybe you've poured yourself out until there was almost nothing left. But today can be different. Today, you can take that energy and begin pouring it back into you. Into the things that bring you joy, whether that's gardening, reading, traveling, joining a walking group, or just sitting in a quiet room with a cup of tea and not waiting for the next emotional storm. You have every right to do that. You also have every right to grieve. Grieve the relationship you hope to have with your child. Grieve the loss of closeness, the birthdays that ended in arguments, the phone calls that turned into lectures. Grief is not weakness, it's a form of love with nowhere to go. And allowing yourself to feel it is one of the strongest things you can do. As you continue on this journey, remind yourself, boundaries are not walls, they're doors. Doors to a life with more peace, more balance, and yes, even more love. Love that's mutual. Love that doesn't require you to shrink, to explain, or to carry more than your share. Some adult children will never admit they were wrong. Some will continue to blame until the very end. But that doesn't mean your story has to end in silence. You can still write new chapters. You can still laugh again, feel safe again, feel you again. And if one day your child comes to you with openness and accountability, ready to repair the relationship, you'll know how to respond from a place of strength, not fear. But until then, it's okay to choose space. It's okay to choose peace. It's okay to stop fixing what they keep breaking. You are not alone. There's an entire community of parents just like you, strong, wise, and learning how to reclaim their peace one day at a time. If this video resonated with you, I encourage you to share your story in the comments below. There's so much healing in being heard. And if you found this helpful, please give the video a like and subscribe to Strong Elderly Life for more supportive content just like this. We're building a space where your experiences matter, your voice is valued, and your well-being comes first. Because here's the truth. You don't have to carry anyone's chaos anymore. You've done enough. You are enough. Here's to living your best life at any age, freer, calmer, and more empowered than ever. You deserve nothing less.